Beauties. I am so excited to have a woman who has caught my eye for a couple of years now with all of the incredible things that she is working on. Her name is Hiro, and she is a registered clinical counselor. She is the founder of the Vancouver Brain Lab. She started so many incredible programs to support and help women and human beings to really flourish in their life. And we are so lucky to have her here today to dive into a conversation about positive psychology. So Hiro, welcome.
Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you so much. As I was saying, such a treat to have this time ahead of us to be together.
So you have a beautiful accent because you spent a lot of your life living in Italy, in Venice.
I have a beautiful accent because I am Italian, and I spent most of my life in Italy. I was born and raised in Venice, that's right. There is a competition between Italians around which is the most beautiful city. So we Venetians feel like Venice is the most beautiful one. Oh. And then I traveled and lived in several European countries. And then 7 years ago, I moved to Vancouver, Canada. How incredible is that?
You were working for a company that everybody who's listening to right now knows. We won't name it, but if you can finish this movie title, The Devil Wears, we'll just leave it there. You were working for this company and then made a massive shift in your life. Now, for a lot of people listening, they were like, you were working there in Venice, the most like beautiful place on earth. How did you all of a sudden switch over to, sitting and listening to people talk about their patterns and their struggles and their difficulties? What led you and inspired you to follow this new career path?
Such a good question. We're going to name it. I was working for Prada at the moment, and lots of the conversations when you work in the fashion industry revolve around the right shade of taupe, the right shade of mustard. And after a few years, you feel the brain rusting a little bit.
It wasn't doing it for you.
At least that was my experience. And mostly it's funny that today we have set for us the sort of the goal to speak about positive psychology, but the driving force of this big shift in my life was pain. Was acknowledging that I was in pain. I had suffered some remarkable trauma in my teenage years, and that pain sort of traveled and came with me, even in the most fancy, working environment. And I remember watching a TED Talk that spoke about positive psychology. It's a master's program in London. It was this psychology speaking about the layers of well-being and psychological well-being, and that did it for me. I thought that's what I want to do. I don't know if you ever had one of those moments. I guess you do.
I absolutely have had one of those moments. Now, some would say that psychology runs in your blood. Your dad was very into psychology, and you actually worked alongside him, if I believe, working with really high-level athletes. On the Chelsea soccer team. Is this correct? Football team, you would say over there. So I'm curious, during that time working with your dad alongside him, what you learned about athletes and high performance individuals in regards to their mental game.
I learned lots. The first thing that I want to say is it matters to me a lot to mention the privilege, first of all, to have access to such incredible opportunities. And so I want to name it. I don't give it for granted that your first internship is working for excellence. And it came because of some positionality in my location with respect to privilege. And so that's truly important to name. So my first internship was working with folks like David Beckham and massive champions. And
did you ever make out with David Beckham?
never making out, but maybe I made him a coffee once, or maybe a photocopy.
You get to massage David Beckham's groin. Is that part of being a psychologist for the Chelsea football team?
I might have brought him a glass of water, just the basic stuff as an internship, right? So the question around top athletes, I think it's a very interesting question, because truly and really, first of all, athletes suffer just as common human beings we do. There's just a different level of comparison. You just compare yourself to your teammate David Beckham as opposed as your neighbor, right?
Yeah.
And on the flip side, there's also for some the ability to flip some neuroticisms or obsessive tendencies for good, right? So fundamentally, most of athletes have a very strong neurotic drive to train, to achieve, to do. So it was a very, very, very interesting experience to be with top athletes, and truly realizing that the part that I was most interested in was not so much the coaching excellence, but it was more understanding the pain component.
The pain, and you've spoken about it before with me about the patterns and starting to recognize the patterns and the things that trigger us into these pain patterns, which I'm so excited to dive into, because holy smokes, 2020 has been a wild ride for so many people. And, whether you're in a place of privilege, whether you're not in a place of privilege, everybody has really, I think, taken a moment to reflect on some things and has been triggered in certain moments. I want to talk about how we navigate a time like this and manage to come out of it not feeling like a total disaster, not feeling like we just got run over by a truck. So I guess to begin, let's talk about happiness in general. It is so natural for us as human beings to strive to be happy. And when I'm coaching women, we always start off by talking about what are your objectives? And always I want to feel happier in my body. I want to feel happier in my life. I want to feel more content. I want to feel, more calm. And there's definitely, a desire to cultivate more of these emotions that we label as positive. Now, I think we all know at this point that it's not possible to be positive and happy 100% of the time. So my first question for you is, what is a normal amount of happy? How do you know if you're in a place where you're like a good level of happy versus not happy enough? I mean, we all know those people who are like pooping rainbows and there's like glitter coming out of their eyes 24/7. Is that what we should all be striving for? Can you talk to us a little bit about the paradigm of happiness?
I would love to do that, and to maybe first sort of insert happiness more into a spectrum, and to say that after the experience of having taken that master's program in positive psychology, I felt incredibly sad.
Oh, really?
Because there is, like you mentioned, a pressure around this positivity and the toxicity of positivity. So there's folks that are genetically predisposed to be happier, and maybe we can take a moment and think in our lives who would be those people that have somehow like a natural predisposition to the rainbow and unicorns attitude. I know that I have one of my best friends. Her name is Fabrizia. She's the mother of 4 twins, and she's incredibly prone to a way of experiencing life in flow and in joy. Beautiful. And so there is a genetic component there. But I was reflecting upon this conversation and truly how my idea of happiness has shifted after studying quite profoundly what happiness is, and I love to change the name and maybe call it psychological well-being. And if you were to ask me, like you did, what would that characteristic be? What is it that we can sort of identify as a factor? I think most importantly would be resiliency. And so there is something quite special that we do in my training, in my meditation training, and that I used to do with my father in excellence in performance. We use physiological parameters to measure reactions and emotions. So we use something called biofeedback and neurofeedback. And what we came across working both with top athletes and with clinical population is that sort of that key to psychological well-being is not so much those folks that are so lucky, like my friend Fabrizia, but is an element of resiliency, the quality of the elastic, right?
Yes.
And how can I endure a global pandemic? How can I work in and dismantle an uprising in terms of social justice? How can I exist in the world where when something personal will happen to me? So all of these difficulties, both personal and societal, I think the factor would be this element of being elastic, being resilient, which I think has so much to do with the work that you're doing, Erin, and around raw beauty, right? It's more about acceptance. It's more about softening. Yeah. It's more about showing up with, wiggly butts, and no makeup on a bad hair day, and being soft towards that. I think that would be a good way to frame happiness. Do you find something useful there?
It's such a work in progress for me. I mean, even listening to you talk about this, my mindset automatically goes to, oh God, I am not resilient. I am like Scott, my husband, he's definitely resilient, but I am crumbling under all of this. I mean, I can't even move houses and I get anxiety. Like you immediately start to, my disposition is to think about the fact that I'm not resilient. But when I actually like take a breath and think about it, it's like I've survived an eating disorder. I've learned meditation. I had postpartum depression. I've got 2 kids. I've built business. Like there is a resiliency there, but it's so interesting how our tendency can sometimes fall into not enough, not doing it right, not, so it's such a work in progress to catch those thoughts and to really recognize what's going on in your mind.
And if I may slow us down, slow you down, slow myself and the friends that are listening, that is already happening, what you just modeled, right? The mind wanted to go somewhere in a place of possible happiness, a world where you are like your husband and you have it, right? And the naming that was happening to you in that very second a few moments ago. And then there's a moment of softening into that spectrum of psychological well-being, just like, oh, and here is me, and look at the things that in this spectrum of life I have achieved and I keep achieving. And it turns out I am having these thoughts and at the same time having a very intelligent and high-functioning conversation with somebody. And so what you said is like, it's a work in progress, is you're modeling it in this very moment. It just already happened in front of us. And we can
just stopping and acknowledging.
And that's why I think your work resonates with so much friends of yours, so much of our friends, because it's very honest. It is very vulnerable. It is very true. And just like, oh, I just caught it. Here it is. It's me. I'm not as happy as I should be. I'm not like my husband. And then just like, oh, but wait a moment. It's a spectrum. Hiro just said that it's a spectrum, and here are the things that positions me in this spectrum. spectrum, right? After all, I am a badass working mom doing amazing things in the world, and also fallible and freaking anxious at times.
Yeah.
Here I am in that spectrum.
You nailed it. All the things over here in the bag of Aaron. So when we talk about resilience, because I don't think many people would think, how do I become happier? How do I have a more positive disposition? And then their mind probably wouldn't immediately go to, I need to be more resilient. Mm-hmm. So first, can you just really, because I think this is so important, can you really break down what does resilient mean? What does that look like day to day?
Truly, my interest has become more and more embodiment and embodied practices and embodied discussions. So truly the first image that comes to mind, the first flavor is elastic, is sugar candy, sugar floss, is a mattress, is a pillow. And so as we're listening to that, how does that resonate in the body? A resilient body is a soft body as opposed as a contracted body, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
You feel it?
Everyone listening right now, just notice, is your body like a stiff board or a soft pillow right now? And can you start to maybe just close your eyes for a moment and imagine your body just melting a little bit, softening and letting go? Can you start to feel what Hiro is saying resilience feels like when you embody it?
Because again, thanks to the valuable example you gave a few minutes ago, when we say things like, immediately I thought I'm not that way, immediately, if we go back to a few seconds ago, there is a contraction.
Oh yeah.
Right? And so the first thing is, what images, what flavors, what invitations are conducive to softness? To me, it's a good entry door to resiliency. First thing. Second, truly, is when I look at it more from a data standpoint. So I told you that we've been measuring resiliency for a while. We hook up athletes, we hook up clients and patients, and what does that look like? It looks like a few interesting things. It looks like we stress people for 2 minutes, and then we give them 2 minutes to breathe and recover. And truly what we see is that we measure muscle tension, we see that muscle softening, we measure brain activity, we see that shifting from very fast activity called beta activity into imaginary visualization like alpha activity. We see breath and the heart rate slowing down. And we see temperature going up in our periphery, in our hands. So truly, once again, we go back to that, what you just did, taking a moment, taking a breath. I went away for a moment, I was lost in the future, in the past, and now let me truly be here, elastic, soft, sugar flossed, gummy beared, and I'm just making verbs of all of these delicious things.
I love it. It's painting such a visual. I'm also like, I'm like, I got to sign up for a session. I want to do one of these. It's so fascinating when you can start to actually see that type of data. I mean, we all feel it in our body is the reality. We can feel when we're uptight and when we're stressed and when the anxiety's there or the overwhelm's there. We know when we're operating from that space. But to actually see it would be really fascinating. So is that like in simple terms, our fight or flight response, you're measuring when it's on and then when it has turned off again and softened?
Yeah, we measure sympathetic drive as opposed as parasympathetic, or in other words, a term that's become also more familiar is vagal tone, vagus nerve, ventral vagal activation. Truly the possibility of the body, of the nervous system to come on board and regulate activity. Are we going to speed up the horse of our bodies, or are we gonna slow down? And both are good. You know, there's nothing wrong around fight or flight. And there's nothing intrinsically right about rest and digest. The trick is, again, that resiliency is how do I become a better rider, horse rider of my horse. And so, yeah, with that respect, number one, yes, we should hang out more often and we should play a little bit together. And two, yes, data is useful, is important. We used it a little bit like a trick to lure athletes into what we wanted to lure them in, which is mindfulness. Yes. It's not necessary and essential to have data, but it's a good entry door, especially for those of us that have like more of data-driven brains, athletes, and traditionally maybe more like not to stereotype, maybe more a masculine population or simply more analytical brains.
Yeah.
So it's fun to play with that too.
So when you talk about resiliency and you're imagining the gummy bear or the pillow or the mattress and the sense of sort of ease and softness, and then I love that you pointed out that if you're it's okay if our body's in fight or flight, and it's okay if our body's in rest and digest, that neither of those are bad. They're actually both really pivotal in order for our body to function and us to be able to survive and thrive in life. But would you say that in regards to moving us further along in the spectrum towards that happy state of well-being, that we want to be in the rest and digest space more often than the fight or flight space?
Yes and no, it depends. If you're a top athlete, you will want to go after that ball as if your life depended on it. And for some of us, you know, we have lives that require a high level of responsivity. I don't know if that's an English word. But what becomes truly intriguing, truly interesting is not falling into the automatic response, right? Not being driven by the horse. And so, yes, the more I reside into that parasympathetic, in that resting, digesting, mattress, pillow, gummy bear, it becomes more available to me in a world where it's less common than the opposite response. And so the more I visit that place of ease, of slowness, of reflection, of consideration, of softness, the more it becomes available for when I need it.
Yes.
And so I become more discerning, I guess.
You start to build those neural pathways so that space of ease feels more like coming home versus the other one, which is the automatic response. 1 second. Lovey, Mama's just recording right now. I would love to give you a hug and a kiss. I just need 30 more minutes, okay? And then I'll come out. Okay. I have a little 5-year-old and a 2-year-old at the door. I didn't give you a hug and a kiss. So cute. Anyways, okay.
And by all means, if we want to stop for a hug and a kiss, I'm always up for that.
They've already run off into the next room. They stay still for 2 seconds. So they're all good, and I will go right out as soon as I'm done to give them all the kisses. So, okay. So from a psychological standpoint, this state of well-being or happiness, what's going on in our body when we're feeling that surge of happiness or joy from a physiological standpoint?
Yeah, there's a few parameters that we also might be more familiar in a world where we talk about neurotransmitters. We might have heard about dopamine for sure.
Yeah.
Right. And again, I spoke about brain activity. So there is a pattern that's been studied by a neuroscientist that I highly admired called Richard Davidson, and he's talking about more activity in the left prefrontal cortex, being able to sort of quiet the amygdala and quieting the negative part of the brain. So there's a few sort of correlates. again, to me, the big one is that strong vagal tone, that strong ability, like you said, to either engage that response of action or of rest, right? So, yeah, alpha brain activity, dopamine, more activity in the left prefrontal cortex, less reactive amygdala, and most importantly, a good rider of the horse.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? Just like, oh, and let me take a breath right now. And in order for the two of us to be able to discern that in this moment, that's what we need, and maybe again, we can do it right now as we're speaking. That physiological parameter would be a strong and delicious and toned and generous vagus nerve. Vagus nerve that connects the brain, the back of our brain, a part called the medulla oblongata, and here my Italian strong accent comes to fruition because all the Latin words sound fantastic.
Yeah.
And goes into the body, into all of our main visceral organs, heart, lungs, and then all the viscera, gut, and deep inside. And so that deep connection, that big communication where the vagus nerve is truly transmitting information both upwards and downwards from the brain to the body and vice versa. That is like a good communication, like a good CEO, that is, a COO, that is orchestrating the orchestra of our nervous system. A good orchestra director. And so when I have that, my sort of suggestion is that would be a happy, resilient, happy, resourced human being. And that's where I'm aiming. That's my quest. And that's where I want to bring folks with me, right? As opposed as a happiness boot camp is like a resiliency boot camp, a vagal tone boot camp, a presencing boot camp.
I love this concept so much. One thing I'm picking up on a little bit is, this might not be correct, so I'll run it by you. The response of the messages being carried up from your vagal nerve into your medulla oblongata, and the chemical reaction that then occurs, the release of dopamine, et cetera, et cetera. This response sounds similar to what happens when our fight or flight response turns on, except for a different release of chemicals into the body. And so whenever I think, and I'm talking a lot about the fight or flight response right now, because I'm currently spending a lot of time there, and it's something that repeats often in my life. So I'm so fascinated by all of it. It is the space, there's so many things that can trigger me back into that response. And I'm so lucky that now I have so many tools to help me feel more resilient and less like the horse is just carrying off with me, like falling off the back, trying to stay on. But, you know, I'm wondering, when I think about the fight or flight response turning on, I always remind myself in those moments, all these feelings are impermanent. This is going to shift and change. I will not be stuck here forever. And just repeating sort of safe messages to myself and my body, because it can feel uncomfortable. Happiness and those positive responses, the flood of dopamine into our body, is also somewhat impermanent. Like, it wouldn't be normal for that to just kind of constantly be turned on, would it?
Absolutely. I love that. I love what you said. It made me think of the first time I met you at a conference in Squamish, and you were guiding the audience into a visualization and a little bit of that priming out of the fight or flight. And once again, yes, absolutely, nothing is permanent, including dopamine. and that momentary fix of joy, of gummy bear, of excitement, of reward. And so once again, it's more about the discernment, it's more about the presencing in the body, the being here, the knowing that in the next moment something might happen that's scary, and it will trigger me, and or my lover will show up and I will feel incredibly happy about that. Right? And then it'll be gone. Right? So the vagus nerve, the medulla oblongata is a very ancient part of the brain. And what it does, it's responsible of very primal reactions, automatic reactions in the body, just like breath, for example. And so when a message comes from the body that, let's say, we've taken a moment, we have engaged in out breath, and so the heart rate as a consequence is being slowed down by vagal tone, so parasympathetic. Then that message of a slowing heart goes up through the vagus nerve and somehow tricks the brain. The medulla oblongata is like a little bit of this very ancient blind characters, like it doesn't really see what's happening, but it's like blinded into thinking, oh, we're actually safe because the heart is telling me that she is slowing down. So there might be some safety here for me to enjoy. And so it's not even conscious, it's not even rational, it's just a little bit of a tricking. But it's also important what you're constantly bringing up, that that it will not always work, that it will always happen, that it's a normal state and it's a healthy state to feel triggered and scared. And can we soften into that normalcy? Can we, or more than normalcy, because normal is a weird word, who is normal, first of all, but more like human, it's a human response. Right?
Yeah, I think that the reason I find reassurance in the fact that everything is impermanent and moving and shifting is that, you know, I hear this all the time from clients and I experience it myself, is that sometimes we almost have this underlying fear when you really start talking to people about feeling joy or happiness, because we're afraid that it will be taken away. What if I get that job? What if I, you know, start working out, my body changes a bit, but I can't keep it up? There's such a fear of losing the happiness, or what it often is worded as with clients is, I'm afraid of failing. I'm afraid that I won't be able to do it or maintain it or keep it. And so I think, you know, what's really been a positive shift in mindset for me is, if everything is shifting and changing and moving and evolving, then all we really have is the present moment, is the ability to feel the happiness in the moment, and then to sit with the anxiety, to feel the low moment, and then to allow the happiness to move through again when it comes. We, of course, can take action in our life. I'm not saying just sit passively in the background waiting for emotions to pass by you. There are certain things, and we're going to talk about that next, that we can do to help cultivate some of the good feelings. But at the end of the day, yeah, all we have is the very moment that we're in. And so there's a bit of a practice of softening into that moment, whether it's happiness or sadness or whatever it is.
We could go different routes here, or routes, I don't know which pronunciation I love the best, but you know, if we want to offer like an easier framework, let's go back to what we said earlier and let's test it. So I'm going to ask you a question, and let's not take our own words for given, but let's experiment if they're actually useful. And when I hear you say, you know, some of us, or I, Erin or Hiro, we could be in a way scared of success or happiness, because that would also go away. So if we were to take that framework of embodiment and being in the body, the question would be, when you're thinking of, will I get that job, or will I lose that person? I will get that happiness and then it will be gone. Is it more an experience of softness, or is it again going back into that tension in the body, right? And so I think that we're coming to a beautiful weaving of our two voices, in that that present moment is a softening, is resiliency, is realizing that there's absolutely nothing other than this very second. And therefore, what you just did. And therefore I can soften, I can surrender 10% more of my weight to this chair that is supporting me, right? And so, yeah, I love to experiment what I say. As I'm aging, just like, I want to just be useful, and I want to just test what I say and see if it's useful. And
you are so useful and helping so many women, and just have such a beautiful way of, I mean, your essence is calming just being around you and listening to you speak. You can tell that you embody so much of what you're teaching right now, and so much of your practice. Now, as I mentioned, there are some tools that we can use to help us soften, to help us build resiliency. And I'm wondering if you could walk us through some of those, so that everybody leaves this episode with some juicy takeaways that they can start incorporating into their own life, should they want to.
Yes, only under the agreement that we all know that the tools will be useful, unless when they will not. And so that it's again not about grasping and tensing towards tools, but that we can invite practices, like you said, as a work in progress, that have the likelihood, the chance, the possibility of uptoning our system a little bit. So number one, gummy bears.
Eat them, eat all the gummy bears.
As someone that also struggled for the longest time with eating disorders, there's an element around that softening, around a little bit of exceptions to the rule, and fun playfulness and food that we would normally eat. So I use that as a metaphor, and I was using that so much so that a local gummy bear company called me and hired me to run some gummy bears meditation. So shout out to that.
Oh, amazing.
So that as a metaphor, take it easy, make it playful, grab a bunch of gummies or fresh apple and savor it, apple slices, and take a moment to savor and pleasure juiciness. That would be one. Two, as you know, I am, just like you are, very keen on the practice of what we might call mindfulness. It's become a little bit of a fad word, but presence and aware and kind awareness with the breath. So that's a second one that takes us into that invitation of the present moment in a way that's soft and diligent at the same time. And then, yeah, sorry.
I'm asking one question about this. So I often talk about 5-5-7 breathing. So breathing in for 5, holding for 5, and breathing out for 7, which isn't exactly mindfulness on its own. That's breath work, a form of breath work. When you say mindfulness, so somebody who's like, I want to be more mindful, but like, how do I actually practice that? Do you have any kind of tangible tools that, or concepts to help somebody really embody what that would feel like if they haven't done it before?
Yeah, counting the breath there's nothing wrong, all the contrary. So even a practice like what you described, that is sort of quantifying the brain, again, as a starter. And again, for those of us that have more analytical and chattery brains, it's a useful practice. Once again, looking more into embodied practices would be to notice or be in relationship with the movement a few centimeters below our belly button, and noticing that actually when we breathe, wow, it's incredible, so much happens, and the belly is expanding with the in-breath, and then it's just resting with the out-breath. And can I, for 3 minutes, be in relationship with that? Right, so there's that. It could be sensations or visualizing, waves that come up and down. Certainly spending time with the out breath would be a plus, because we're both being mindful and resourcing the parasympathetic system that you were talking about. So
love it. Perfect. I love that visualization of the area and space just beneath your belly button. And nobody ever pays attention to that area. When was the last time you thought about the space? I think they call it the fupa. When was the last time you checked in with that space? Maybe just start trying that and noticing, as she said, just noticing what's going on in your body. Yeah. Beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. And even in the languaging, we can invite as opposed to try, because we will try and we will fail. And that's part of the experiment. But if we are experimenting, then it's already included in the rules.
Excellent.
So the third guideline, the third trick after gummy bears and residing and abiding in the belly, yes, would be one of my favorites, because I live in Canada and the ocean is so cold. And so cold water. I am privileged and lucky enough to live on this land. And the ocean is luckily so close that sitting and taking a dip in cold water and experiencing that once again as, can I soften into something that normally I would call cold, or I would call unpleasant, and can I train the possibility of being in relationship with cold?
And I love that you mentioned this one.
Do you love it too?
Oh, I'm so privileged as well to live in Whistler, where we have lakes and to have access to the ocean. And I was somebody who for years, I loved the ocean when I was younger. And then after my eating disorder, I lost so much weight and I was just constantly cold. And I had a real fear of being cold for years after, even when my weight recovered. It's only been really in the last 2 years that I've let myself experience the joy of like lakes and ocean and finding my breath again and realizing I'm okay. And I'm quite obsessed with it now. And the impact that it seems to have on me mentally and physically is just very profound. Like I know everyone's talking right now about Wim Hof and Wim Hof breathing and his ice baths, and there's something there. And now you're mentioning it as well. So can you access this just from a shower if you are somebody who does not have a lake or an ocean nearby?
Yeah, and also what you brought up is a very good point. One of the other privileges that I behold is to not suffer mental illness at this stage. And so we need to be mindful that it might be a little bit too much for some of us. And so experimenting with cold water could mean dipping our toes into cold water. It could be placing our hands in our bucket or the sink with cold water. It could absolutely be the shower for those of us that don't have the privilege of having natural ocean, cold ocean. So very, very good points that you're bringing up. And for closure, that again speaks to vagal tone and how there is a natural mammalian response of the medulla oblongata, of older centers of the brain that would quiet down when we especially immerse our face into cold water. So it's to try. The agreements where I'm going to give guidelines only if we take them with the agreement that maybe they will work, maybe not, that we're not giving secrets, giving experimentation.
Yes.
To resource the body in softness.
Options to try. It's so interesting about the cold water. When I think about my initial response is to tighten up, but as you said, we use this as an opportunity to practice allowing ourselves to soften. It's the same almost as in yoga when you get into a really hard, challenging position and you're asked to breathe and to connect to your body, and you get through the pose somehow and you feel like, oh, I just did that. I was resilient. I made it through. So I love these little ways that we can practice honing our resilience when we're not in a real life situation where, your nervous system and your creepy little medulla oblongata have taken off on you blindly.
She's just doing her job.
Just doing her job. Amazing. Thank you so much.
It
has been such a pleasure to talk to you. Where can everyone find you if they would like to connect with you further?
Thank you so much for having me and offering me your platform. You can find me in all the good old places. So either on my website, the www.vancouverbrainlab.com or thelabofmeditation.com, or on Instagram. I'm not yet on TikTok like I saw you are wiggling your part, and those videos are so funny. So in the lab with Hiro on Instagram, or again the lab of meditation and the lab all underscored.
Beautiful. We will make sure we link to all of those. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to copy the link, send it over to somebody else who you think it might support. And remember, as always, your story, your body, your mind, your journey are unique. So take everything that we've talked about in this episode, figure out and think about what really resonated with you, and leave the rest behind. Have a beautiful day, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Ciao, ciao. Thank you so much.